Today, we're exploring The Art of Manipulation by R.B. Sparkman, an eye-opening guide to understanding the psychology of influence and persuasion. Whether you're in business, personal relationships, or just navigating the world, the ability to manipulate situations to your advantage can be a game changer. But as Sparkman teaches us, manipulation isn't just about tricking people. It's about understanding human behavior and using it to create positive outcomes for everyone involved. In this video, we'll break down the key strategies from the book, showing you how to influence, persuade, and even win arguments, all while maintaining respect and integrity. So if you're ready to unlock the secrets of persuasion and manipulation, grab a seat, and let's dive into the art of manipulation. Chapter 1. The 5% Rule. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to succeed effortlessly, while others fail no matter how hard they try? Sparkman begins by introducing what he calls the 5%, a small group of individuals who understand human behavior so well that they can influence and manipulate others to get what they want. These 5%ers aren't necessarily smarter or luckier. They simply know how to play the game of life better. To explain this, Sparkman shares his own journey. Frustrated by his inability to achieve the same level of success as others, he decided to learn from the best, and the best weren't professors or motivational speakers. Instead, they were street-smart manipulators, hustlers, and con artists who had mastered the art of persuasion in the real world. One of Sparkman's key mentors was Hardy, a silver-tongued master manipulator. Hardy wasn't a traditional businessman. He was a hustler who sold anything and everything, from land to cars to encyclopedias. Despite his drinking habits and lack of job stability, Hardy could close deals that others would have found impossible. One of his favorite tricks involved selling worthless plots of West Texas land. Now, let me paint the picture for you. Imagine a hot, dusty trailer office with a simple map on the wall. Hardy would meet potential buyers who were lured in by a newspaper ad promising beautiful West Texas land at dirt cheap prices. As soon as a customer walked in, Hardy's charm would take over. He'd begin with small talk, making the customer feel comfortable and valued. Hardy would say something like, I've been doing this a long time, and let me tell you, I've seen people turn these little plots into gold mines. One of my customers just bought a similar lot and doubled his money in 6 months. I've got one left and I was saving it for a friend, but you seem like the kind of person who knows a good deal when they see one. Notice how Hardy frames the conversation. First, he uses social proof, mentioning another customer who supposedly profited from a similar purchase. Then, he creates urgency by claiming there's only one plot left. Finally, he flatters the buyer by implying they're smart enough to recognize a great opportunity. But Hardy didn't stop there. He understood that people are often hesitant to make big financial decisions, so he'd add a layer of emotional pressure. If the customer seemed unsure, Hardy would lean back in his chair, smile, and say, "Look, I'm not in the business of convincing people. If you're not interested, that's fine. I've got others waiting. But if you do decide to take this chance, you'll thank yourself later." Opportunities like this don't come around often. This statement was genius. By pretending not to care whether the customer bought the land or not, Hardy made himself seem independent and in control. He also subtly played on the buyer's fear of missing out. No one wants to walk away from a deal that others are supposedly lining up for. And the kicker? Hardy always had a map ready to show the buyer exactly where their plot was. The map was just vague enough to avoid scrutiny, but it looked professional enough to seem legitimate. Most customers didn't ask too many questions. They trusted Hardy because of his confidence and charisma. The result? Hardy sold plot after plot of practically worthless land, walking away with commissions that most salesmen could only dream of. Sparkman's lesson here is clear. Manipulation isn't about luck or intelligence. It's about understanding and exploiting human nature. Hardy knew that people respond to urgency, flattery, and confidence. By mastering these elements, he became part of the 5% who control the other 95. And while you might not be selling land, the principles apply everywhere. Whether you're negotiating a raise, convincing someone to join your project, or even just winning an argument, the key is to approach the situation strategically, not impulsively. Sparkman leaves us with this thought: success belongs to those who can think and act like the 5%. Chapter 2: Character Types to Watch Out For. Not all manipulators are harmless. Some people will take advantage of you without hesitation, and Sparkman warns us to identify these types early. In this chapter, he breaks down subtle red flags that can save you from being deceived. Let's explore some of the most important lessons. Sparkman's first warning is about people who protest too much. He shares a story about Hardy, the master manipulator, who once borrowed $200 from him. Hardy was arrested for public drunkenness and called Sparkman from jail, begging for help. Hardy said, "Rick, you're my only real friend in the world. I swear on everything, I'll pay you back the minute I get my hands on some cash. You'll never regret this." Now, that's a lot of promises for just one phone call, isn't it? Sparkman initially believed Hardy because of the urgency and sincerity in his voice. But what happened after Sparkman bailed Hardy out? You guessed it, he never saw a dime of that money again. The lesson here is simple. When someone keeps repeating the same reassurances over and over, "Trust me," or "I swear I'll pay you back," it's often a sign they're lying. As Sparkman puts it, the more someone protests, the more suspicious you should be. Sparkman also warns us to avoid people who lie to others. He explains that dishonesty isn't selective. If someone lies to one person, they will lie to you too. Hardy once told Sparkman, "If a man lies to someone else, what makes you think he won't lie to you when it suits his purpose?" This is a powerful insight because many of us give dishonest people a pass when they're lying to others. We tell ourselves, "Oh, they'd never do that to me." But Sparkman reminds us that manipulators operate by their own internal code, and no one is exempt when they want something. Another warning sign comes from people who claim they used to have money but lost it. Sparkman shares the story of a man from Dallas who claimed to have once been a millionaire. This man was charming, confident, and full of stories about his past successes. He convinced Sparkman to lend him $800, promising to pay it back quickly because he knew how to make money. But here's the truth. If someone was truly skilled at handling money, they wouldn't have lost everything in the first place. Sparkman never saw that $800 again, and he learned a valuable lesson: don't trust someone's words without proof of results. Now, let's talk about another red flag: people who focus on tiny, unimportant details while ignoring the big picture. Sparkman calls these people incompetents, and they exist everywhere, especially in business. He shares the story of his first boss, who obsessed over dress codes but ignored the fact that his sales team had lost all respect for him. Within a month, the boss was fired because his misplaced priorities led to failure. Here's the thing: life is too complex to handle every problem at once. Successful people prioritize the most important tasks first and let minor issues slide. If you see someone focusing on trivial details, like obsessing over what tie you're wearing instead of your actual performance, it's a sign they lack judgment. Sparkman's advice is clear: avoid incompetent people in business and life, or their failures will drag you down too. To recap, Sparkman gives us 4 key signs to watch out for. 1. People who protest too much. If someone keeps repeating how honest or trustworthy they are, be skeptical. 2. Liars. If they lie to others, they'll lie to you. 3. People who claim they used to be rich. Talk is cheap, so don't lend money or trust without proof. 4. Incompetence. Those who focus on trivial details while ignoring what truly matters. By recognizing these character types early, you can protect yourself from being manipulated or exploited. Sparkman's wisdom here is simple but powerful. Trust actions, not words. People reveal who they are if you pay attention. As you listen to these warnings, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever trusted someone who fit one of these descriptions? If so, you're not alone, but now you'll be better prepared next time. Chapter 3: How to Make a Slave Out of a Person. One of the most fascinating and powerful techniques in the art of manipulation is intermittent reinforcement, a concept rooted in psychology but masterfully applied by manipulators. If you've ever found yourself unable to get over someone, obsessing over a relationship, or chasing after something you couldn't quite have, you've probably been a victim of this tactic without even realizing it. To explain this, Sparkman introduces a famous psychological experiment involving a pigeon. Picture this: a pigeon in a cage with a button it can peck. Every time the pigeon pecks the button, it gets food. At first, the pigeon pecks consistently, knowing there's always a reward. But when the reward is given randomly, sometimes food appears, sometimes it doesn't, the pigeon becomes obsessed, pecking the button constantly and desperately. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Humans behave the same way. When rewards or attention come unpredictably, we can't help but crave them even more. Sparkman shares a powerful story to show how this works in relationships. He tells us about a girl he once dated who was in a toxic relationship with a man named Bill. Bill was no Prince Charming. In fact, he was the kind of guy who treated her horribly, sometimes even physically harming her. But despite this, she couldn't let go of him. Sparkman describes meeting her one night when she showed up to their date with a bruised eye. He asked what happened, and she admitted that Bill had hit her again. Yet she couldn't leave him. "I told him I was done," she said. "And you know what he did? He kissed me goodbye. That kiss lasted 5 minutes, and I spent the whole night with him again." The craziest part? She chose the cafe for their date that night because it was Bill's favorite spot. She hoped to see him there, maybe even with another woman, so she could see what she looked like. You're probably wondering, how did Bill, an abusive and unreliable partner, have so much power over her? The answer is intermittent reinforcement. Bill would sometimes treat her like a queen, showering her with affection and attention. But other times, he would withdraw completely, ignoring her or even treating her badly. This inconsistency left her craving his approval and affection even more, much like the pigeon obsessively pecking for food. Sparkman's point is clear. When someone gives us attention all the time, we start to take it for granted. But when they mix kindness with coldness, when we never know what to expect, we become hooked. People want what they feel they can't fully have. Now, before you think this only applies to romantic relationships, let's talk about how this works in business and everyday life. Imagine you're a manager and you have an employee who's doing a great job. If you praise them every single day, they'll quickly come to expect it. Your praise will lose its power, and they might even start taking you for granted. But if you praise them sporadically, sometimes giving them recognition and other times remaining silent, they'll work even harder to earn your approval. It sounds manipulative, and it is, but it works because of human nature. Sparkman also gives us a warning. If you're too nice all the time, people will take you for granted. This is why, in relationships, being overly accommodating or available can backfire. He recalls how his own kindness didn't win over Bill's girlfriend because she already knew Sparkman would always treat her well. In contrast, Bill's unpredictable behavior kept her emotionally hooked. Here's how you can apply intermittent reinforcement strategically. 1. Give rewards or attention unpredictably. Whether it's in a relationship, at work, or with friends, mix affection or praise with moments of distance. This keeps others on their toes. 2. Pull back when you feel taken for granted. Sparkman emphasizes that as soon as someone starts acting indifferent or entitled, it's time to withdraw. The absence of attention often makes people value it even more. 3. Know when to push and when to pull away. In dating, for example, showing interest but maintaining independence makes you far more attractive. People instinctively want what seems just out of reach. Now you might be asking, is this moral? Sparkman leaves that up to you. His job is to report what works, and intermittent reinforcement works incredibly well. But he warns readers to use this tactic responsibly. In the wrong hands, it can become a tool for manipulation and harm, just like Bill's behavior with his girlfriend. The biggest lesson here is that human nature is predictable. If you understand it, you can use it to your advantage. Sparkman's final advice in this chapter is, never let yourself be the person who's always there. Be the person who's missed when you're not around. So whether you're trying to succeed in business, improve your relationships, or simply understand why people behave the way they do, intermittent reinforcement is a tactic worth mastering. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Chapter 4. The world is rife with favoritism. Life isn't fair. That's the cold truth Sparkman wants us to understand in this chapter. Hard work, talent, and efficiency are important, but favoritism, relationships, and influence often matter even more. Sparkman argues that whether we like it or not, favoritism shapes promotions, business deals, and success in life. The good news? You can use it to your advantage. To make this point, Sparkman shares an interesting story about a businessman he once knew. This man built a massive empire, turning a tiny used car lot in a slum into a multi-million-dollar holding company with dealerships, finance companies, and insurance firms under his control. You might think this success came from sheer hard work and brilliance, but Sparkman reveals the truth. Favoritism played a huge role. Here's an example. This businessman gave a lucrative advertising contract to a small agency run by one of his friends. He also bought supplies from a salesman who happened to date his daughter. Did these friends offer the best deals or provide the most value? Probably not, but the businessman chose them anyway because relationships matter. Sparkman explains that people naturally favor their friends and those they feel connected to. Whether you call it networking, building relationships, or playing politics, the reality is this: people help those they like. If you ignore this fact, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. So, how do you make favoritism work for you? Sparkman offers several tactics. The first is one of the simplest yet most effective tools: smiling. Now, I know what you're thinking. Smiling? That's it. But Sparkman breaks down why this works and how to do it right. He shares his own experiment. He tried 4 different approaches when meeting strangers. 1. Never smiling at all. 2. Smiling constantly, even at awkward moments. 3. Smiling only after saying something he thought was funny or important. 4. Smiling during and after saying something. The results? When he smiled during and after saying something, people responded positively. They laughed more, engaged more, and seemed to genuinely enjoy his company. Sparkman explains that this type of smile feels natural, confident, and genuine. It disarms people and makes you likable. On the other hand, constant smiling made him look insincere or foolish, and never smiling at all made him seem cold or unapproachable. The lesson? Use your smile strategically. Start smiling as you begin speaking and hold it for a moment after you finish. This simple habit can dramatically improve how others perceive you. The second tactic Sparkman shares is subtle flattery, but here's the catch: it has to be done carefully. Most people dislike obvious flattery because it feels fake. For example, saying, "Wow, you're the smartest person I've ever met," might come off as insincere or manipulative. But when flattery is done subtly, it feels genuine and powerful. Sparkman shares a brilliant way to flatter someone without them even realizing it. Ask for their advice. He gives an example from his time as a salesman. One day, he walked into the office of Steve, a record store owner, who had all but stopped advertising with Sparkman's radio station. At first, Sparkman didn't expect much success. Steve looked young, wore jeans and a t-shirt, and didn't seem interested in doing business. Out of curiosity, Sparkman asked Steve, "How did you get into this business?" That one question changed everything. Steve lit up and spent over an hour telling Sparkman about the years of sacrifice it took to build his store from nothing. He talked about sleeping on a cot in his shop because he couldn't afford rent, about fighting off competitors, and about finally turning his business into a success. Sparkman listened intently, asking follow-up questions and showing genuine interest. By the end of the conversation, Steve felt connected to Sparkman. Why? Because Sparkman had made him feel valued. He had subtly flattered Steve by showing respect for his journey and success. That day, Steve not only agreed to a year-long advertising contract, but he also offered free records for the radio station to play. Sparkman's lesson is this: people love to talk about themselves, especially about their achievements. Asking someone about their work, success, or advice flatters them without being obvious. It makes them feel important, appreciated, and understood, and that's the key to building relationships and gaining their favor. The third tactic Sparkman suggests is to share how someone's advice or actions have helped you. Let's say your boss gives you a small piece of advice, like how to handle a tricky client. Later, you go back and say, "Hey, I tried what you suggested, and it really worked. Thank you." To the boss, this isn't just flattery, it's validation. It shows that their opinion matters and has value. This subtle compliment can make them more likely to favor you in the future. Sparkman sums it up like this: favoritism runs deep in human nature. Instead of fighting it, learn to use it. People will always help those they like, trust, and feel connected to. By smiling strategically, flattering subtly, and showing genuine interest in others, you can make favoritism work for you. So, let me ask you, when was the last time you asked someone for advice or showed interest in their journey? If you haven't done this recently, try it. You'll be surprised by how quickly people warm up to you. The key takeaway from this chapter is clear: build relationships. In an unfair world, the person who masters favoritism gains the edge. As Sparkman says, if you can't beat the system, use it to your advantage. Chapter 5. The essence of manipulation. At the core of the art of manipulation lies one simple but incredibly powerful mindset: I don't need you. You need me. This attitude is the key to controlling situations, whether in relationships, business, or everyday interactions. When you project independence, when you make it seem like you're the one with the upper hand, you gain control. Sparkman shares how Hardy, the master manipulator, used this mindset effortlessly in both his personal and professional life. Hardy believed that the person who could afford to walk away always had the most power. If you can make someone think you don't need them, they'll naturally want to please you and do things your way. To see this in action, let's go back to Hardy's days as a land salesman. Hardy was working for a sketchy real estate company selling plots of land in West Texas. These plots were practically worthless, dry, empty patches of dirt. But Hardy still managed to sell them like they were gold mines. How did he do it? Here's what Hardy did. First, he'd meet with potential buyers who were drawn in by newspaper ads promising beautiful, affordable West Texas land. Hardy would start the meeting with charm and confidence, making the buyers feel important. He'd show them a map of the property and talk about its potential, casually dropping hints about other buyers who had already jumped at similar opportunities. But here's where Hardy's genius came in. He always acted like he didn't need the sale. On his office wall, Hardy put up a chart with 15 empty circles, each circle representing a plot of land. Every time he sold a lot, he'd write the buyer's name in one of the circles. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Before any real buyers came in, Hardy wrote fake names in all 15 circles. Then, at the bottom of the chart, he wrote in big letters, "I won my trip to Acapulco." When real customers walked in, Hardy would smile and say, "You're a little late. I just sold my last lot yesterday. But let me check something for you. He'd pick up the phone, pretend to call his boss, and say, "Hey, I know I'm out of lots, but I got a good customer here who really wants one. Is there any way you can free up that last piece of property for me?" After a pause, Hardy would hang up, sigh, and turn to the customer with a reluctant smile. "You're in luck. He said I can let you have the last lot. But you've got to decide today. There's no holding it." See what Hardy did here? By acting like he didn't need the sale, by pretending the land was already in high demand, he created a sense of urgency and exclusivity. The customer believed they were getting a rare opportunity and felt compelled to act fast. Sparkman explains that this mindset works because it plays on human nature. People naturally value what seems scarce or hard to get. If you act desperate, people instinctively pull back. But when you act independent, when you project the idea that you have other options, they start chasing you instead. Now let's talk about how this mindset applies to relationships. Sparkman noticed that Hardy used the same tactics with women. He never acted needy or desperate. Instead, he treated every interaction with casual confidence. If a woman rejected him, Hardy didn't care, at least that's what he made her believe. He would shrug and move on, often paying for a motel room before going out to the bars because he knew he'd succeed. Why did this work? Because women found Hardy's independence and confidence irresistible. By acting like he didn't need them, he made himself seem more valuable. Sparkman points out that this same principle applies to anyone, regardless of gender. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever been more drawn to someone who seemed hard to get? Have you ever lost interest in someone who was too eager or available? That's human nature at work. People want what they think they can't easily have. In business, this mindset is just as effective. Imagine you're negotiating a deal. If the other party senses that you're desperate, if they think you need the deal, they'll push for better terms. But if you confidently signal that you have other options, they'll be far more willing to compromise. Sparkman shares another story to illustrate this. A salesman once tried to close a deal with a hesitant client. Instead of begging for the client's business, the salesman stood up and said, "Look, I'd love to work with you, but if you're not ready, that's fine. I have other meetings to get to. Just let me know what you decide." The client, sensing the salesman's confidence and independence, suddenly changed his tune. "Wait, sit down. Let's talk this through." By walking away, by showing he didn't need the deal, the salesman shifted the power dynamic and got what he wanted. Sparkman's lesson is simple but powerful. Never let anyone see you as desperate. Whether you're negotiating in business, pursuing a relationship, or dealing with friends, always project independence. Act as if you can walk away, even if you can't. This mindset shifts the balance of power in your favor. Of course, Sparkman isn't suggesting you become arrogant or dismissive. The key is to strike a balance. Show confidence, not desperation. Be kind and respectful, but make it clear that you don't need the other person. They need you. Sparkman leaves us with this thought. People follow those who don't chase them. If you can master the "I don't need you" mindset, you'll find that others start chasing you instead. So, next time you're in a negotiation, a job interview, or even on a date, ask yourself, are you projecting confidence or neediness? Remember, the person who can afford to walk away always has the upper hand. And if you act like you don't need them, you might just find that they start needing you. Chapter 6. How to pick apart someone's motives. One of the most important skills for a successful manipulator is the ability to read people, to understand their motives, desires, and fears. Sparkman emphasizes that, in any situation, knowing what makes people tick can give you the upper hand. And to do this, you need to pay attention to the little things, the behaviors, the subtle cues, the things they say. Sparkman tells us that understanding someone's motives is like reading a book. It's all about the details. He shares an example from his own life. He was once working with a client who seemed difficult to read. She was reserved, kept her cards close to her chest, and never seemed to express much emotion. At first, Sparkman thought she was just a tough negotiator. But after a few meetings, he noticed something important. Whenever they discussed money, her body language became more tense. She would cross her arms, look away, and become quiet. This was Sparkman's first clue. He realized that money made her feel uncomfortable or insecure. Rather than pushing her to discuss the financial details, Sparkman decided to switch gears and talk about other aspects of the deal, things that made her feel more comfortable, like the long-term impact of the partnership or how their shared values aligned. This not only helped him build rapport, but it also allowed him to slowly coax her into negotiating better terms. The key here is that Sparkman wasn't focused on what she was saying. He was paying attention to what she wasn't saying, and more importantly, to her physical reactions. This is a perfect example of emotional intelligence in action. He was able to pick up on the emotional cues that told him where to steer the conversation and when to press or back off. But Sparkman also talks about how this works in reverse. People are not always open about their true feelings or motives, especially when they're trying to manipulate you. He shares a story of an acquaintance he once met at a business seminar. This man, who we'll call Dave, came across as charming, outgoing, and very confident. He immediately struck up a conversation with Sparkman and quickly began offering advice on how to expand his business. Dave was so generous with his suggestions that Sparkman almost felt indebted to him. But there was something off. As Sparkman thought back over their conversation, he realized that every piece of advice Dave gave came with a hidden agenda. For example, when Dave suggested a strategy to increase sales, he also mentioned how he had a software program that could help Sparkman implement it, at a price, of course. Every suggestion had an underlying business opportunity for Dave to profit from. Sparkman began to suspect that Dave's generosity wasn't just out of the kindness of his heart. It was a calculated move to establish himself as an expert and make Sparkman feel that he owed him something. This is a classic manipulation tactic, making someone feel indebted to you, even if they haven't directly asked for help. The lesson here is that people often use subtle techniques to manipulate you without you even realizing it. They disguise their self-interest as generosity or kindness, when in reality, they're just trying to position themselves to get something in return. When someone offers help, ask yourself, what's in it for them? Sparkman explains that the most skilled manipulators can hide their motives under layers of charm, confidence, and empathy. They know how to make you feel special, like you're the most important person in the room. But the moment you let your guard down, they will strike. He describes how a manipulative person will often mirror your body language and language to make you feel more comfortable and connected. This technique, known as mirroring, creates an unconscious bond between you and the manipulator. For example, Sparkman recalls a time he was negotiating a business deal. The other party, a seasoned negotiator, subtly mirrored his posture and speech patterns throughout the meeting. At first, Sparkman didn't notice it. But as the deal progressed, he began to feel more comfortable with the negotiator, as if they were on the same wavelength. Only later did Sparkman realize that the negotiator had done this on purpose to create rapport, lowering his guard and making him more receptive to the deal's terms. So, how can you avoid being manipulated while still using these tactics effectively in your own life? Sparkman offers a few key tips for reading people's motives. 1. Pay attention to their body language. People reveal a lot through their nonverbal cues. Are they tense when talking about money? Are they too eager to help you? These signals can point you toward their true intentions. 2. Look for patterns of behavior. If someone repeatedly acts in a certain way around you, it's likely a clue to their deeper motivations. Are they always offering you something that benefits them, like Dave's advice that came with a hidden cost? 3. Ask the right questions. People love to talk about themselves. Sparkman suggests asking open-ended questions about their goals, values, or motivations. This will give you insight into what drives them and whether those motivations align with your own interests. 4. Trust your gut. Sometimes your intuition is the best tool for reading someone. If something feels off about a person or their actions, don't ignore that feeling. Trust that your brain is picking up on subtle cues you may not even be conscious of. In the end, Sparkman's main point is simple. People are motivated by their own desires and fears. The more you understand these motives, the better equipped you'll be to navigate situations where manipulation might be at play. By honing your ability to pick apart someone's motives, you can protect yourself from being manipulated while also using those same tactics to your advantage. Chapter 7. The Power of Positivity. Sparkman dives into the power of positivity, but not in the way you might expect. He explains that while we often hear that positive thinking can solve all our problems, the reality is more complex. Positive thinking isn't about ignoring problems or living in a constant state of optimism. It's about using positivity as a tool to influence others and manage situations. To break this down, Sparkman shares a powerful example from his own life. He once worked with a manager named Linda who was always cheerful, always upbeat, and on the surface, appeared to be a perfect example of positive thinking. But there was something unsettling about Linda's constant positivity. It wasn't genuine. It was a mask she wore to hide her lack of preparation and poor decision-making. One day, Sparkman had to work on a project with Linda. The task was crucial, and the team was under a lot of pressure. However, Linda seemed oblivious to the stress the team was feeling. Instead of addressing the real issues, she walked into the room every morning with a forced smile, constantly repeating phrases like, "Everything is going to be just fine. Don't worry. We got this, team. Stay positive." While Linda's intentions were good, Sparkman noticed that her forced positivity wasn't making things better. It was actually masking the underlying issues that needed attention. People were starting to feel disconnected from her. The team didn't need empty encouragement. They needed clear solutions, support, and leadership. Linda's approach was doing the opposite of what positivity should do. It was alienating people. This experience made Sparkman realize that there's a fine line between positivity that motivates and positivity that covers up problems. He argues that true positivity isn't about denying reality. It's about confronting challenges while maintaining a hopeful, solution-oriented attitude. Positive thinking should inspire action, not shut down critical thinking. Sparkman gives the example of a successful entrepreneur he once met, a man named Greg. Greg was known for his positive attitude, but unlike Linda, his positivity was grounded in reality. When Greg faced challenges, he didn't bury his head in the sand and say, "It'll all work out." Instead, he was transparent about the issues, acknowledged the difficulties, and then turned to his team with a simple, motivating question. "Okay, what are we going to do about it?" By acknowledging the difficulties and presenting a clear plan of action, Greg showed his team that positivity wasn't about ignoring the challenges. It was about choosing to focus on solutions. His approach made people feel empowered rather than dismissed, and as a result, they followed him with trust and respect. Sparkman's lesson here is that positivity works best when it's used in the right context. It's not about pretending things are perfect, but about staying focused on the solutions while facing problems head-on. He also points out that being genuinely positive makes you more persuasive. People want to be around those who uplift them and give them hope. But if that positivity is fake or superficial, it will backfire. In fact, Sparkman warns that fake positivity is one of the most destructive forms of manipulation because it leads people to overlook real issues and follow someone who isn't being honest. To use positivity to influence effectively, Sparkman advises. 1. Be transparent. Don't ignore the hard stuff. People appreciate honesty, even in difficult times. The key is how you communicate it. 2. Focus on solutions, not problems. Rather than just saying everything will be okay, guide people to find actionable steps to improve the situation. 3. Don't overdo it. Positive thinking should come naturally, not forced. Too much here can seem fake and patronizing. 4. Balance positivity with authenticity. Genuine positivity stems from believing in the solutions, not just putting on a happy face. Sparkman ends the chapter with a powerful reminder. Positivity should be like a fire, warm and illuminating. But if it gets out of control, it can burn you. The ultimate takeaway here is, don't let positivity blind you to the truth. Positivity is a tool for success, but only when it's rooted in reality and paired with action. When you use it wisely, you'll inspire those around you to face challenges with hope, energy, and determination. Chapter 8. How to Avoid Financial Manipulation. In this chapter, Sparkman dives deep into the world of financial manipulation, how people exploit others for money, and how you can avoid being taken advantage of. The sad truth is, money is often at the center of many manipulative schemes, from shady business deals to personal loans that come with hidden traps. Understanding how financial manipulators operate is the first step to protecting yourself and your finances. Sparkman opens with a story from his own experience. He once worked for a man named Earl, a slick businessman with a silver tongue. Earl had a reputation for being charming and persuasive, able to talk people into deals that were, to say the least, less than favorable. Earl didn't care about the long-term consequences for others. He only cared about making the sale and walking away with cash in hand. One day, Earl introduced Sparkman to a potential client who was interested in purchasing a large piece of equipment. The client, a small business owner, was looking to expand his operations and needed the equipment to keep up with demand. Earl pitched the sale, emphasizing how much money the client would save in the long run by making this purchase. He even presented financial projections showing how the equipment would pay for itself in just a year. However, Sparkman noticed something odd. Earl wasn't offering the client a traditional financing deal. He was offering a lease-to-own arrangement that seemed too good to be true. Sparkman was immediately suspicious, but he kept his doubts to himself. The client, however, didn't hesitate. He signed the deal, excited about the prospect of expanding his business. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but a few months later, Sparkman found out the truth. The lease-to-own deal had hidden clauses that made the overall cost far higher than the client had initially understood. The client was paying more in interest than the equipment was worth. And because the lease had an option to buy clause that could only be exercised after 5 years, the client was locked into a contract that prevented him from seeking better options elsewhere. The lesson here is clear. Financial manipulators thrive on making complex deals appear simple. Earl had presented everything in an easy-to-understand way, but buried in the fine print were terms that would cost the client far more than he expected. Sparkman emphasizes that the best way to protect yourself from financial manipulation is to always read the fine print. Sparkman offers several key tips to avoid falling victim to financial manipulation. 1. Read everything carefully. Never sign anything without fully understanding the terms. This includes contracts, leases, loans, or anything else involving money. Sparkman highlights that many manipulative deals rely on the buyer not paying attention to the details. 2. Ask questions. If something seems unclear, ask. The best manipulators rely on the fact that most people won't ask questions or challenge the terms. Don't be afraid to seek clarification, no matter how small the issue seems. 3. Do the math. Sparkman stresses that you should always break down the numbers yourself. If someone is presenting you with financial projections or deals, take the time to calculate the true cost. In the case of the lease-to-own deal, if the client had taken a moment to compare the terms to standard financing options, he would have realized he was being taken advantage of. 4. Get a second opinion. If you're not confident in your understanding of a deal, bring in a third party to help. Whether it's a financial advisor, a lawyer, or just a trusted friend, getting an objective opinion can save you from making a bad decision. 5. Recognize high-pressure tactics. Financial manipulators often use urgency to pressure you into making a decision. Sparkman describes how Earl would often tell clients, "This offer won't last long," or "You need to sign today to lock in these terms." These tactics are designed to make you feel rushed and less likely to scrutinize the deal. Always take your time before committing to anything, especially if you're being pressured. One final point Sparkman makes is that manipulators are often charming, persuasive, and knowledgeable. They use their charisma and confidence to create an illusion of expertise and trustworthiness. Earl was a master at this. He could talk for hours about the benefits of the equipment and how it would change the client's life. But all his smooth talking didn't change the fact that the deal wasn't in the client's best interest. Sparkman warns that financial manipulators thrive on your desire to trust them. They know that when you believe they have your best interest at heart, you'll let your guard down. But the reality is that these manipulators are focused on getting their share, and they'll do anything to ensure that you don't see what they're really up to. The key takeaway? Be skeptical of financial deals that seem too good to be true. Take your time, ask questions, and never rely on someone's charisma or charm to make financial decisions. At the end of the day, your financial future depends on the decisions you make today. Sparkman ends the chapter with a powerful reminder. If you don't understand the deal, don't make it. No matter how good it sounds, no matter how much they sell you on it. Read the fine print, and always trust your gut. Chapter 9, Manipulating Thoughts. In this chapter, Sparkman explores the art of manipulating someone's thoughts, not directly telling them what to think, but subtly guiding them to come to conclusions on their own. This is one of the most powerful forms of manipulation because it makes the target feel like they arrived at the conclusion all by themselves, which makes them far more likely to follow through on it. Sparkman begins with a story about a business meeting he had with a potential investor. The investor, a wealthy entrepreneur named Jack, was known for his sharp mind and his ability to make decisions quickly. He wasn't easily influenced, which made him a tough target for anyone trying to manipulate him. But Sparkman had a plan. Instead of pitching his idea directly, Sparkman decided to start the conversation with a series of open-ended questions. He didn't try to sell Jack on the idea right away. Instead, he asked about Jack's goals, his previous investments, and what kind of projects he was passionate about. Jack, being the confident businessman he was, loved talking about his own successes. The more Jack spoke, the more Sparkman was able to plant seeds about how his project could align with Jack's interests and goals. By the end of the conversation, Jack felt like the idea Sparkman was proposing was his own. He was eager to invest, not because Sparkman directly told him to, but because he had come to the conclusion himself that it was a smart move. Sparkman had manipulated Jack's thoughts without Jack even realizing it. So, how did Sparkman do it? It all came down to framing. He didn't tell Jack that his investment would be a great idea. Instead, he guided the conversation in such a way that Jack was led to that conclusion on his own. Sparkman used subtle cues, listening carefully, and asking questions that made Jack think about how the investment aligned with his long-term goals. By doing this, Sparkman helped Jack to convince himself that it was the right decision. This is one of the core principles of manipulation. People are far more likely to act on ideas they feel they've discovered themselves. If you push someone too hard, they'll resist you. But if you guide them to the conclusion, they're far more likely to accept it and feel good about it. Sparkman sums it up with, "People don't want to be told what to think. They want to come to conclusions on their own, so give them the space to do so." Sparkman gives another example of how this technique works in personal relationships. He tells the story of a woman named Lisa who was dating a man named Tom. Lisa didn't like how Tom was treating her. He was distant, sometimes rude, and didn't make her feel special. But instead of confronting him directly about it, Lisa used subtle manipulation to get Tom to change his behavior. Lisa didn't demand more attention from Tom. Instead, she started talking about a recent conversation she had with a friend, where the friend was discussing how important it is for partners to show affection and appreciation. Through this conversation, Lisa subtly planted the idea in Tom's mind that she valued affection and attention in a relationship. Over time, Tom began to change his behavior without Lisa ever having to ask for it. The power of this tactic is incredible because it allows you to influence others without ever forcing your will on them. By guiding them to the right conclusions through subtle suggestions and questions, you can shape their behavior without them even realizing it. But Sparkman warns that this type of manipulation should be used with care. It can be easy to cross the line into deception, and if someone feels like they've been manipulated in this way, it can backfire. The key is to be genuine and respectful when you're guiding someone's thoughts. If you're always trying to trick someone into doing something, it can eventually destroy the trust in the relationship. Sparkman goes on to explain that manipulating thoughts works best when it's done gradually. If you try to influence someone too quickly or too aggressively, they'll notice. But if you can make them think it's their own idea, they'll be far more likely to follow through. Here are Sparkman's tips for manipulating someone's thoughts effectively. 1. Use questions, not commands. Instead of telling someone what to do or think, ask questions that guide them toward the right conclusion. 2. Listen more than you talk. The more you listen, the more you can understand someone's true desires and needs. This gives you the power to lead them toward the decision you want them to make. 3. Plant ideas subtly. Don't be too obvious with your suggestions. Plant a seed, let it grow, and let the other person come to the conclusion on their own. 4. Make them feel in control. People resist manipulation when they feel like their autonomy is being taken away. So make sure they feel like they're the ones making the final decision. The lesson here is that influence is far more powerful when it's subtle and indirect. By manipulating someone's thoughts, you don't force them into action. You help them convince themselves to take the steps you want. And when they take those steps on their own, they'll be much more committed to the outcome. Chapter 10. Winning Arguments. Mastering the art of manipulation doesn't just apply to business deals or personal relationships. It can be incredibly useful in winning arguments. In this chapter, Sparkman dives into the psychology behind why people argue and how you can use subtle manipulation techniques to guide a conversation in your favor, without looking like you're trying to win at all costs. Sparkman starts with a story about an argument he had with a colleague, Greg. Greg was known for being stubborn and not easily swayed by others. He was an expert at dominating conversations, and his ability to turn every argument into a victory made him a formidable opponent. One day, Sparkman found himself in a heated discussion with Greg about a business decision. Greg was completely set in his beliefs, and no matter what Sparkman said, Greg refused to listen. Instead of continuing to push harder, Sparkman remembered something important. In most arguments, the louder and more forceful person doesn't necessarily win. They just make the other person retreat. The key to winning, Sparkman realized, was not to force his own viewpoint, but to change Greg's perspective without making him feel attacked. So, Sparkman decided to use a technique known as the double bind. This is a tactic where you offer someone two choices, but both choices lead to the conclusion you want. He said to Greg, "Look, Greg, I see where you're coming from, but let's think this through. We could either proceed with the current plan, but there's a high risk that we might run into issues. Or we could tweak the plan a bit, minimizing the risk and increasing the chances of success. What do you think?" By giving Greg these two options, Sparkman subtly guided him to the outcome he wanted. Greg ended up agreeing to the changes Sparkman suggested. But from Greg's perspective, he was the one who had made the decision. He didn't feel forced, and Sparkman didn't have to argue with him. This is the beauty of the double bind technique. It gives people the illusion of control while actually pushing them in the direction you want. Sparkman points out that in many arguments, people just want to feel like they have the power to make decisions. If you give them that sense of control, they'll be much more likely to agree with you, even if the choices are limited. But Sparkman warns against being too obvious with this technique. If you give people choices that are too narrow or too obviously manipulated, they'll catch on and resist. The key is to make the choices appear equally valid, even though they both lead to the same conclusion. Another strategy Sparkman shares is the foot-in-the-door technique. This is a classic manipulation tactic that works by getting the other person to agree to a small request first, making them more likely to agree to a bigger request later. Sparkman gives an example of how he used this technique in a meeting with a client who was hesitant to sign a major deal. At the beginning of the meeting, Sparkman asked for a simple commitment. Would you be willing to agree to a short-term trial of the project to see if it works? The client agreed, thinking it was a harmless request. Once the trial period was successful, Sparkman asked for the larger commitment, the full deal. Because the client had already agreed to the smaller request, it was much easier for him to agree to the bigger one. Sparkman emphasizes that small commitments lead to bigger ones. When you get someone to agree to a minor point, they're more likely to feel psychologically invested in agreeing to the next step. Another powerful strategy Sparkman introduces is called the foot-in-the-mouth technique. This one is a bit sneaky, but it can be extremely effective in conversations. The idea is that you get someone to say something that makes them feel obligated to agree with you. Sparkman gives a great example of how this technique works. He once used it in a negotiation with a supplier who was resistant to lowering the price. Sparkman said, "I know you're a fair person, and you want to make sure both of us get a good deal. Don't you agree?" By getting the supplier to agree to this basic premise, Sparkman set the stage for negotiating a better price. The supplier now felt obligated to live up to the image of fairness he had just agreed to, which made it easier for Sparkman to get a better deal. The power of the foot-in-the-mouth technique is that people don't want to look bad in front of others. Once they've made a commitment, no matter how small, they will feel obligated to follow through. In this case, the supplier had publicly committed to fairness, so it became harder for him to justify not lowering the price. Finally, Sparkman wraps up the chapter with an important reminder: stay calm and stay strategic. In any argument, emotions can easily escalate, but the best manipulators know that controlling their own emotions is the key to controlling the conversation. Sparkman explains that the most effective people in arguments are those who stay composed, listen carefully, and use subtle techniques to guide the discussion toward their desired outcome. Sparkman's advice for winning arguments is clear. 1. Give options, not commands. The double-bind tactic works wonders when you make the other person think they have a choice. 2. Start small. Use the foot-in-the-door technique to get small commitments, making it easier to get larger ones. 3. Make them agree to something small. The foot-in-the-mouth technique makes it harder for someone to back out once they've agreed to something. 4. Stay calm and composed. The more emotional you get, the less persuasive you become. Keep a cool head and guide the conversation strategically. Sparkman finishes the chapter by saying, "Winning an argument isn't about being louder or more aggressive. It's about being smart, subtle, and in control." Chapter 11. Manipulating Against Their Will. Chapter 11 dives into one of the most powerful and subtle forms of manipulation: manipulating someone against their will. While it might sound harsh, Sparkman explains that this type of influence is often necessary, especially in situations where you need to lead or guide someone who's initially resistant to your ideas. The goal is not to force them into something, but to subtly bend their will without them realizing it. Sparkman starts with a story about a colleague of his named Carl. Carl was a brilliant engineer, but he was also inflexible and stubborn, two traits that made him incredibly hard to work with. Sparkman found himself in a situation where he needed Carl's support on a big project, but Carl was vehemently opposed to the idea. Instead of confronting Carl head-on, Sparkman decided to use a clever technique to get Carl on board without him feeling coerced. Instead of directly persuading Carl or arguing with him, Sparkman used a technique called the unargue technique. The idea behind this technique is simple. Don't argue with the person at all. Instead, agree with whatever they're saying, even if you don't believe it, and then gently introduce your own perspective in a way that seems like it was their idea all along. Sparkman recalls saying to Carl, "You're absolutely right, Carl. This project is risky. I can see why you'd be concerned. But what if we adjusted the plan just a little? We could still move forward but minimize the risk. Does that sound better to you?" By agreeing with Carl's concerns first, Sparkman disarmed his resistance. Carl now felt that Sparkman was on his side, and he was more open to hearing about the adjustment. Without feeling attacked, Carl eventually agreed to Sparkman's version of the project, even though it was Sparkman's idea all along. The beauty of this technique is that Carl didn't feel manipulated. He felt that Sparkman was simply helping him refine his own ideas, which made Carl more inclined to agree. This technique works because people don't like to feel like they're being told what to do. When you can make them believe that they came to the decision themselves, they're far more likely to follow through. Sparkman emphasizes that the key to this technique is not to challenge the person's beliefs directly. You simply shift their focus in a way that makes them feel like they're still in control. Another example Sparkman gives involves a friend of his, Jane, who was trying to convince her boss to approve a new marketing campaign. The boss, Tom, was very traditional and didn't like taking risks. Instead of arguing with him directly, Jane used the leading them to water technique. She didn't force Tom to accept her plan. Instead, she led him down a path where he eventually came to the conclusion that the campaign was a good idea. Jane started by asking Tom about his experience with similar campaigns in the past. She didn't pitch her own idea right away. She simply let Tom talk about the campaigns he'd worked on. As Tom spoke, he began mentioning some of the successes he had with innovative campaigns in the past. Jane simply nodded and asked, "So, based on your past success, would you say that innovation has played a big role in your results?" Tom, without realizing it, had already opened the door to the idea of innovation. Then Jane took a step further. "I was thinking of a campaign that uses those innovative techniques you mentioned earlier. Would you be interested in seeing it?" By leading Tom to a conclusion he had already subconsciously agreed with, Jane made him feel like the idea was his own. Sparkman points out that this technique works best when the person doesn't realize they're being led. By subtly guiding Tom's thinking, Jane was able to get him to agree to the new campaign without any pushback. The unargued technique works wonders in business, negotiations, and even personal relationships. It's effective because people resist pressure. When you can give someone the illusion of choice, when they feel they made the decision themselves, they are much more likely to be on board with your ideas. Sparkman makes it clear that you don't need to fight someone to make them see your perspective. Instead, you can use subtle techniques to lead them to that conclusion, making them feel empowered rather than manipulated. However, Sparkman warns that this type of manipulation should be used ethically. Don't use these techniques to deceive people or get them to make decisions that aren't in their best interest. The goal should be to guide people in a direction that benefits both of you. If you use manipulation for personal gain at the expense of others, it will eventually backfire. To sum up, Sparkman offers these key takeaways for manipulating against someone's will. 1. Don't argue directly. Use the unargue technique to agree with their concerns first, then gently introduce your idea. 2. Lead them to water. Help the person come to the conclusion themselves by subtly guiding their thinking. 3. Make them feel empowered. People are more likely to agree with you when they feel they have made the decision on their own. 4. Use these techniques ethically. Don't manipulate people into making decisions that aren't in their best interest. Use these skills to help both parties reach a beneficial outcome. Sparkman wraps up this chapter with a powerful line. Manipulation isn't about forcing others to see your way, it's about helping them see it on their own. Chapter 12. The Role of Pressure. Pressure is one of the most powerful tools in a manipulator's arsenal. In this chapter, Sparkman discusses how pressure can be used to influence people to make decisions, often faster than they would under normal circumstances. But here's the catch: pressure can be a double-edged sword. If you use it too aggressively, it can backfire, but if applied correctly, it can push someone toward making the decision you want them to make. Sparkman starts with a story about a man named Todd, who was in charge of negotiating contracts for a large company. Todd was brilliant at what he did, but he had one major flaw: he was too accommodating. He would often bend over backward to give clients what they wanted, sometimes compromising too much in the process. This led to a lot of deals falling apart and costing the company valuable time and resources. One day, Sparkman found himself in a meeting with Todd and a client who was notorious for being indecisive. This client, a well-known restaurant chain owner, was sitting on the fence about a large deal that could significantly impact his business. The problem? He had been dragging his feet for weeks, hesitating to sign the deal. Todd was giving him all the time in the world to decide, even offering more and more concessions to keep the client happy. Sparkman knew that this approach wasn't going to work. Instead of continuing down the path of accommodation, Sparkman decided to apply subtle pressure. He turned to the client and calmly said, "You know, if you're not ready to move forward with this deal, we'll have to explore other options. There are other businesses waiting for the same opportunity, and while we value your business, we don't have unlimited time." Notice how Sparkman didn't make it sound like an ultimatum. He didn't say, "You have to sign this deal now or else." Instead, he created a sense of urgency by gently reminding the client that they weren't the only ones involved in the process. This subtle pressure worked wonders. The client, who had been hesitant for weeks, immediately became more engaged and started making decisions on the spot. By the end of the meeting, the deal was closed. What Sparkman did here was clever. He didn't force the client into a decision, but he made them realize that time was running out. He didn't push too hard. He simply gave them the sense that the opportunity might slip away, and that was enough to spur action. Sparkman explains that the key to applying pressure is to avoid being overly aggressive. If you come across as too demanding or threatening, people will retreat and resist. But if you create a sense of urgency without making them feel cornered, they're more likely to make a decision. The goal is to nudge them toward action without pushing them into a corner. Another important tactic Sparkman discusses is using limited time offers. This technique plays on the fear of missing out, the idea that if someone doesn't act now, they'll lose the opportunity forever. Sparkman recalls a time he was negotiating with a potential partner for a joint venture. He had already presented the offer, but the partner was dragging his feet. So, Sparkman decided to create urgency by saying, "You know, we've had a lot of interest in this project from other companies. We can't hold this offer forever, and if we don't move forward soon, we may need to seek other partners." By subtly implying that the offer was limited, Sparkman created pressure without actually making a hard demand. The result? The partner agreed to the deal that day, fearing that he might miss out on a valuable opportunity. Sparkman warns, however, that creating false urgency or being too heavy-handed with pressure can backfire. If someone feels they're being manipulated into a decision, they will resist even more. The key is to make the pressure feel organic, not forced. You want to make them feel like they're making the decision because it's in their best interest, not because they're being coerced into it. In relationships, Sparkman notes, pressure can be used in a more subtle way. For example, if you're dating someone and they seem hesitant to commit, you might create subtle pressure by showing that you're not going to wait forever. But again, the goal isn't to force them into a decision. Instead, it's about shifting the power dynamic so that they see the value in moving forward. Sparkman shares the story of a woman named Karen, who was dating a man who wasn't ready to settle down. Instead of pushing him directly, Karen started going out more, meeting new people, and showing that she had options. As soon as she did this, the man started taking her more seriously and felt the pressure to make a decision about their future. Sparkman's main takeaway from this chapter is clear. Pressure, when used correctly, can be a catalyst for action. However, too much pressure can lead to resistance and push people away. The trick is to find the sweet spot where you're encouraging someone to move forward without making them feel cornered. Sparkman offers these tips for using pressure effectively. 1. Create a sense of urgency without being too aggressive. Let the person know that time is running out, but don't give them an ultimatum. 2. Make the opportunity feel exclusive by hinting that others are interested or that the deal won't last forever. 3. Don't overdo it. The more pressure you apply, the more likely the person will push back. Instead, use subtle nudges to guide them toward making a decision. 4. Don't make it personal. Pressure works best when it's focused on the situation, not the person. Avoid making them feel like they're being forced into a corner. The chapter wraps up with Sparkman's key point. The best manipulators know how to apply pressure without making it feel like pressure. They know how to nudge someone toward a decision while making them feel like they arrived at it on their own. Chapter 13. If all else fails, go dirty. In Chapter 13, Sparkman takes us into a more controversial realm, using dirty tactics when everything else fails. While many of the techniques discussed so far are subtle and refined, Sparkman acknowledges that there are times when more forceful or ethically questionable methods might be necessary to achieve your desired outcome. However, Sparkman emphasizes that these tactics should only be used sparingly and only when absolutely necessary. He stresses that manipulation isn't about being malicious. It's about achieving results in a way that's strategic and effective. With that in mind, he introduces a few dirty tactics that can be used when more ethical strategies haven't worked. The first example Sparkman shares is about a sales negotiation he was involved in. He had been working for weeks to close a deal with a potential client, but no matter what he offered, the client kept hesitating. They couldn't decide if the deal was worth it, and every time Sparkman made a concession, the client would come back asking for even more. At a certain point, Sparkman realized that being accommodating wasn't going to work anymore. He needed to change the game entirely. Sparkman decided to use a tactic he called the decoy technique, essentially presenting the client with a false option to make the actual deal seem much better in comparison. Here's how it worked. Sparkman presented the client with two options. 1. The standard deal, which was fair but had a few limitations. 2. A much more expensive, over-the-top deal that came with unnecessary extras. The client naturally rejected the second deal. No one will want to pay for that. But in doing so, the first deal suddenly seemed much more appealing. Sparkman knew that the client wouldn't go for the extreme deal, but by making them compare the two, the original deal seemed like a steal in comparison. This tactic isn't just about manipulating the situation. It's about using perception to your advantage. By creating a sense of relative value, Sparkman got the client to feel like they were getting a great deal, when in fact, it was exactly what they'd been offered before. The decoy technique works because it manipulates comparative thinking. Humans are wired to make decisions based on what they're comparing. By introducing a seemingly worse option, you create a benchmark that makes the better option seem far more attractive. Sparkman also talks about the guilt trip technique, which is a method of manipulation that involves making someone feel indebted or responsible for a decision. While this can be a more emotionally intense tactic, it can be extremely effective in the right context. Sparkman shares a story about a time he needed a colleague's approval for a project. His colleague, Tim, was incredibly difficult to work with, often rejecting ideas without much thought. After several failed attempts to persuade Tim logically, Sparkman decided to try a different approach. He told Tim, "You know, Tim, I've been putting a lot of effort into this project, and I really believe it could work. I could really use your help here. It would mean a lot to me, and I know it's something you'd be proud to be a part of." By appealing to Tim's sense of responsibility and subtly making him feel like he owed it to Sparkman to help, Sparkman made it hard for Tim to refuse. In this case, Sparkman didn't force Tim into an uncomfortable situation, but instead used emotional pressure to make him feel obligated to step in. And Tim ended up agreeing to the project. This kind of tactic plays on empathy, but it can be dangerous if overused. Sparkman cautions that guilt manipulation should be done carefully, as it can quickly backfire if the person feels like you're taking advantage of their good nature. The key to using this tactic is to balance it with sincerity and not make the person feel like they're being manipulated or used. The last dirty tactic Sparkman covers is what he calls the surprise attack. This tactic involves catching someone off guard and forcing them to react quickly. Sparkman recalls a time when he was working on a project with a very indecisive partner. This partner, Rick, had a tendency to procrastinate and drag his feet whenever it was time to make a decision. To break the deadlock, Sparkman decided to force Rick's hand. He set up a meeting without telling Rick that he was going to present a final proposal. When Rick arrived at the meeting, Sparkman immediately presented the deal and said, "This is the final proposal. I need your approval today, or we'll have to move forward without your support." The surprise attack worked because Rick wasn't prepared for it, and he didn't want to lose out on the opportunity. With the pressure on, Rick quickly approved the deal, even though he had been hesitant just moments earlier. This technique is powerful because it forces the person to make a decision on the spot. They don't have the luxury of time to back out or reconsider. However, Sparkman points out that this approach is high risk. If you catch someone off guard too many times, they may start to resent you for putting them in high-pressure situations. It's a powerful tool, but it should be used sparingly. Sparkman ends this chapter with a strong warning. Dirty tactics should never be your go-to strategy. While they can be effective in certain situations, they should be used only when absolutely necessary, when the stakes are high, and other tactics haven't worked. Manipulating someone into making a decision is never ideal, but it can be justified when the outcome benefits both parties and when no other approach has worked. The key takeaway from this chapter? Be strategic, not malicious. Manipulation, even dirty manipulation, should always be about finding the best possible outcome for everyone involved, not about taking advantage of others. Use these tactics wisely, and they can help you get what you want without damaging relationships in the process. Chapter 14. Squelching Ingratitude. To wrap up the art of manipulation, Sparkman tackles the issue of ingratitude, a problem that can derail relationships, both personal and professional, if not handled carefully. No matter how much you give or how hard you try to help someone, if they don't show gratitude, it can lead to resentment, disappointment, and a breakdown in trust. In this chapter, Sparkman discusses how to handle situations where you feel unappreciated and how to prevent others from taking your kindness for granted. Sparkman begins with a story about a former business partner named Tom. Tom was someone Sparkman had worked with for years, and over time, Sparkman had gone above and beyond to support him in their projects. He would cover for Tom when he missed meetings, offer advice without being asked, and even put in extra hours to help with projects. However, no matter how much Sparkman did for Tom, he never seemed to acknowledge or appreciate his efforts. In fact, Tom often acted as if Sparkman was obligated to help him, as though it was expected. After a particularly frustrating meeting, Sparkman realized that he had been enabling Tom's ingratitude. Tom took advantage of Sparkman's generosity because Sparkman had never set any boundaries. Sparkman had been so focused on being helpful that he failed to communicate how his support should be valued. This is a common problem. When people don't feel the need to show gratitude, it's because they haven't been made to recognize the value of what you're offering them. So how do you deal with ingratitude without causing a rift in the relationship? Sparkman shares a few strategies for maintaining balance while ensuring that your help is not taken for granted. First, Sparkman stresses the importance of setting boundaries. If you constantly give without expectation of reciprocation, people begin to expect your help and take it for granted. Sparkman shares how, after realizing Tom's lack of appreciation, he started to set clearer boundaries. Instead of automatically offering help, Sparkman would ask Tom, "I'd be happy to help you with that, but I need to make sure my time is respected. Can we schedule this for later in the week?" This simple change shifted the dynamic. Tom began to see Sparkman's help as something valuable, something that came with limits. By making his time feel limited and more precious, Sparkman created an environment where Tom began to show more appreciation for the help he was getting. Sparkman's second tactic for dealing with ingratitude is making your contributions known. People can't show appreciation for something they don't realize you've done. If you put in a lot of effort behind the scenes but don't share that with the other person, they might assume that you didn't do much at all. Sparkman gives the example of a colleague who always praised his team but never gave Sparkman credit for the extra hours and work he put in. Instead of letting this slide, Sparkman subtly mentioned the additional effort he'd made. For example, he said, "I was up late last night working on the final details for the presentation, but I'm glad it all came together." By communicating his efforts in a way that was modest yet clear, Sparkman made it known that his contributions had been significant. This reminded the colleague of Sparkman's hard work, which led to a greater level of appreciation. Another method Sparkman discusses is getting others to recognize your contributions. Sparkman shares a story of a time when he worked on a project with a team that seemed to overlook his contributions. Instead of trying to convince them himself, Sparkman used a technique where he created opportunities for others to acknowledge his work. For example, in a meeting, Sparkman asked a team member, "What did you think about the analysis I provided for the market data? Did it help with your presentation?" This simple question prompted the team member to acknowledge the work Sparkman had done, and soon, others in the group began to follow suit. By getting other people to see his value, Sparkman avoided the discomfort of having to praise himself directly. The final tactic Sparkman recommends for dealing with ingratitude is cutting off the flow of resources, whether it's time, money, or energy, until the person recognizes and appreciates what you've done. Sparkman uses the example of a business mentor who, after helping a mentee for years, finally decided to stop giving free advice when the mentee stopped showing any appreciation. Sparkman's mentor told the mentee, "I've been giving you my time and expertise, but I've noticed you've stopped valuing it. If you want my help, you'll need to come to me with a clear plan and respect my time." This wasn't an ultimatum. It was simply a clear message that in gratitude, appreciation must be earned. Sparkman notes that sometimes when you stop giving freely, the person will either realize their mistake and begin to appreciate you more, or they will simply move on. Either way, Sparkman argues that it's better to stop enabling behavior that's unappreciative. The key takeaway here is simple. Don't let others take you for granted. Set boundaries, make your efforts known, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself when you feel unappreciated. It's easy to fall into the trap of always helping and giving without getting anything in return, but if you don't set limits, people will continue to expect more from you without recognizing the value of what you offer. Sparkman wraps up the chapter and the book by emphasizing that manipulation, at its core, is about understanding human nature and relationship dynamics. When used ethically and strategically, manipulation can help you get what you need while creating positive outcomes for everyone involved. But without boundaries, clear communication, and mutual respect, manipulation can quickly become toxic. The final thought Sparkman leaves us with is this. In life, people will take what you give, and sometimes they won't give anything back. Don't let them. Set your limits, value yourself, and teach others to appreciate what you bring to the table. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the art of manipulation by R.B. Sparkman. We've explored the powerful techniques that allow you to influence others, whether it's through subtle persuasion, setting boundaries, or even applying pressure when needed. From reading people's motives to using dirty tactics when all else fails, Sparkman has shown us that manipulation isn't just about getting what you want. It's about understanding human nature and guiding people toward decisions that benefit everyone involved. But as Sparkman wisely reminds us, these tools should be used responsibly and ethically. Manipulation, when done with respect and care, can open doors and create opportunities. But without boundaries, clarity, and respect, it can easily backfire and damage relationships. So, as you move forward, remember this. Manipulation isn't about control, it's about influence. It's about using the tools at your disposal to create win-win situations, to help others while ensuring your own goals are met. And above all, it's about understanding that the most powerful manipulators are often those who can help others feel in control, even when they're being guided toward your desired outcome. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. And as always, if you want to dive deeper into the art of manipulation or any of the concepts we discussed today, make sure to pick up the full book and read it for yourself. It's packed with even more insights and practical advice. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and always remember, the power to influence is in your hands.